The views expressed in the following show are of the host, the guest, and the callers. The content of the following show, its accuracy, authenticity, and the ramifications of the use or application of said content is the responsibility of those speaking and listening, not the broadcast medium.
All right, so we're back and we're live, Feet to the Fire. I'm your host, James off the Yanchek, the Black Knight of Talk Radio. We have Richard Miller coming up, having a little trouble with his feed, or I should say our connection. We may connect metaphysically, we may connect mentally, spiritually, but internet-wise, interwebs-wise, there's a problem. So he's going to be out of sync. I tried to work on it, nothing I can do. We can either not do it or do it, and I know you guys would like to hear Richard Allen Miller, even if he's a little out of sync, which I guess he is out of sync. He's ahead of the sync. Oh, ahead of the sync. That's what a compliment, huh? Anyway, let's go to him right now. Richard Allen Miller live, and welcome to the show, Richard.
Hey, here's Ricky. Hi.
Yeah.
It's nice to be back. How bad is that? Oh, yes, it's very bad.
Yeah, well, at least you're there live, and they could see your smiling cherubic face. So
it's nice to see you too, James. Really.
Yeah, it's always fun talking to you. A couple of things I'd like to talk about out of the box real quick is, like, I'm looking out. I mean, I'm 63. You got a few years on me, but I would say that what I'm going to say is you would agree with is that all my life, what's going on today has not even been close to any other point in my time. It's just crazy. There's stuff that's being said, the extremes, the rioting, I mean, even back in the 60s with the rioting was nothing compared to this. This is like a real revolution going on. And
that is correct, by the way. You are correct. I just posted something by that Gupta Sanjay, that medical doctor. I actually like him, and he says today that we're losing it. All of America is losing it. What's going on? Well, the virus itself is not dangerous. What's dangerous is the fact that most of us are not healthy, and our immune system can't stand up to this kind of virus. Page 2. In the medicine I studied, and I went to Harvard Medical and became an anesthesiologist from the University of Washington, I can say that immunization is not the correct or appropriate way to approach some virus like this, which by its very nature tends to mutate and change. And you can't immune against something like that. The only thing that can handle that is your immune system. And your immune system should have no trouble at all handling it if you were healthy. But because of advertising and how did they put it in the late night show about Doritos? He said, "Oh, don't worry, we'll make more." America's diet alone and what we choose for food groups and why is abominable. And everybody knows it. But nobody cares. Who cares? I'm having fun eating my Dorito corn chips or my chocolate bar. Chocolate, of course, cures everything. My girlfriend, when she gets really in a weird mood, I just back off to a safe place, safe distance, and then throw chocolate at her. That usually works.
Yeah, chocolate also.
I'm kidding. All of these things that we love are toxic at some level. And, of course, we're eating way too much of everything. I had a little metaphor once where the metaphor or myth came to eating 3 times a day was when God told the ox god that he needed, this is from Hindu mythology, Upanishads, that he needed to eat only once every 3rd day. And the ox god, being stupid, got it wrong and said it was 3 times a day. Now, that's 9 times more food than what we normally would need to run a smooth engine. And of course, the concepts of it are the only diet that I found actually works for me is when I count calories. And when I say that, if you eat 1,200 calories a day, you know, you have your breakfast, lunch, and dinner on 3 different levels in the refrigerator, already measured out, 1,200 calories a day, anybody will lose weight. Of it, and that means usually about 2 to 3 pounds a day, predicated on how big and strong you are and how far you're into the diet. Usually it takes about 10 days for the engine, your body, to change and morph into an engine that's working off the fat that it's stored. That's what the real problem is. You start storing this fat, and the next thing you know, you're diabetic. And that's not a very good thing to do. And there are different kinds of blood types, and each one has a different set of enzymes that it can easily produce that you can work with. Type O blood usually cannot be a vegetarian. Beans and rice, you simply can't get the enzymes that you need from those like you might if you were A or AB negative or Web positive, you know, AB. Negative, or rhesus negative, is a blood type that probably came from aliens when the reticulin came down and tried to play with our race. I don't know where it came from. Nobody does know where rhesus negative came from. It just kind of all of a sudden appeared. All the different blood types can be pretty well traced on when they first started appearing and so on. And O is one of the older ones that doesn't metabolize specific enzymes that are necessary in the current diets that we enjoy today. And so it's more difficult for an O blood type to be a vegetarian. Vegetarian can be lots of different forms of that, including lacto-ovo, where you eat non-dairy products, cheese and eggs and milk and things of that nature. In the Hindu mythologies, going back to 14th century, vegetarian generally includes anything with a face or grandparents. That's a good definition. And and I found that I need to eat meat more than not. I like fish, that's good enough. And so I do a lot of fish because I live on the coast. And that pretty much abides by my current standards of metaphysics with Gurdjieff. And what he said was to eat your environment. If you live on the coast, you eat fish. If you live in the Midlands, you're probably going to digest grains better, that kind of thing. But that's the real problem with our virus, is that it's not so much dangerous. It spreads everywhere. Everybody's going to probably get it. And so what you need to do is just make sure your immune system's up to snuff. And if it is, you'll walk through it just like you do any other kind of virus.
It seems to me that the
not healthy. I'm sorry?
It seems to me the issue I'm looking at is the using of this virus for political purposes.
Oh, well, yeah, of course. Everybody's going to do that.
To institute.
And, God, whatever. Everybody wants to see changes. The way I heard it this morning, you can tell a Democrat by a Republican by who wears the mask.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the mask to me is more metaphoric of control. And
so that's true, because the mask has its own grief problems. While it might, when I see someone around with a mask, I go up to them and I say, I give you permission to remove your mask in my presence because I'm not worried about getting the virus from you. Wearing a mask stops them from giving you a virus they might have. However, if it's a food handler, that's kind of stupid, because while they got their mouth covered and everything like that, they don't have their hands covered when they're handing you food. And so what's the sense of that? And so, yes, it's more political in terms of laws and how you behave. Now, the good news about this virus is that it's starting to implement things that should have been done a long time ago, like social distancing. Social distancing in Safeway or a food store absolutely should have occurred 10 years ago.
Yeah.
The way people are in grocery stores, it's abominable.
All right, but let me interject here. One of the things is that I kind of look at things in terms of most impact, shortest time, right? And the gravity of the situation now is that the greatest impact in the shortest time is the destruction of businesses, the destruction of free movement. I'm not even thinking about social distances. I'm not even thinking about possibility of healthier. It started out that would be something, but now you could see that they're using this to destroy as a political tactic, as a way to ruin the economy, etc. That's the goal from it. It has nothing to do with the virus. In fact, they're probably disappointed that the virus wasn't worse. They've had to actually raise the numbers.
Yeah, and I have some friends deep in the military that I talk to every day. And one of them called me the other day, and Mike Harris, he's a good friend, and he said, if you think the virus was bad, wait till you see what happens before the end of October. And what that he was referring to is that we are now, the next major thing that's going to hit our society this next couple of weeks, you'll start to see it happen, is retirement funds. They're all going to start failing.
Well,
so if you think virus was a bad situation in terms of how it affected businesses and that, watch what happens to the retired people today.
Now, you mentioned about October, and I just got a phone call from a guy who's kind of got his ear in the ground through, he was involved in, as a kind of a technical guy making movies, and he's just kind of got his ear to the ground, right, in that area. And he warned me about COVID-20 that's coming out in October. This is the talk that they're going to name it as like a different strain because there's some kind of different qualities to it.
That's the problem with getting an immunization, is that it's not going to work because by the time you take the immunization for the one thing, then there's a new one out. And the bad news is what they're actually doing in an immunization is giving you a small enough dose that you get sick from it. And what it is they're giving you a small dose of the virus so you build up antibodies. That's how.
What I've been reading about this case, this is, according to what I've been reading, there's 100 people trying to find this patent or virus, whatever. The problems is that the methodology on this one is the first time in history they're going to approach it by giving an RNA, quote, vaccine. In other words, they're going to make their own virus, let's say, that will go in and change your DNA so it's not affected by COVID. Well, I want nothing to do with nobody fooling my DNA.
And if you don't comply, how did the Borg put it? Resistance is fuel. I wouldn't touch that with a 10-foot pole, and it may well be that's what starts the revolution in Oklahoma. That's where they're going to first try to implement that law, where everybody is going to, and the people that resist it need to be reindoctrinated. That's the actual word.
Right. Well, that's my concern, Mike. That if I look forward, and people say to me, "What's your concern?" The major concern is the vaccine, to the suspending of rights, even to boot camps and whatever for those who don't comply. That's the major one. The minor short-term one is continuing rioting and attacking and unrest. And in between, somewhere in there, is called an election. And in between in there somewhere is also called winter for those who live up in the north. And if your supply line of energy goes down, you're dead. So, that's why I'm looking at alternatives.
How do you like your internet today?
Yeah.
I noticed Rick Bear was going to do me last Saturday and had to wait until Wednesday because he had no internet in Montana.
Well, this is what I foresee. I can't prove this, but I look at things like a chess game, logic, with a little touch of intuition, right? And you know me from years. I'm a thinker and, critical. It looks to me like they're going to shut down phones, internet, electricity, gas after the election. depending upon what happens, Trump probably wins. It's not even Trump. Trump has now become irrelevant in his own personal self now. It's become this battle between the new cultural revolution that we're going through. It's a neo-Maoists. Excuse me. And I don't know.
I don't even understand what's going on in Seattle. I grew up in Seattle, and back then my father was prejudiced because he was Navy, and I meant that as a joke. But in Seattle, we didn't have a black problem, a white problem, or a living color problem. Prejudices back then, the Central District, CD, was where the poor people lived, and some of them were white, and most of them were black, and it wasn't about segregation. I didn't even experience racial variation until I was doing graduate school back during the Philadelphia riots. And that blew me away. I'd never seen anything like that. Arthur Ashe was my doubles partner when I played Davis Cup with him. And I can tell you, I never even thought about color until we were sitting in the Deer Park Hotel in Newark, Delaware, doing graduate level, you know, how you sit back in a bar and you're doing your homework for the next day in graduate school. And all of a sudden, in all three sides of the windows, there were flaming gas coming through the window. And when we ran out to protect ourselves, there were a bunch of big black bikers out there with chains waiting for us. And I remember that happening to me. It was like Kent State. I'd never seen anything like that before. And when I got back to Seattle, when I came out of grad school, Seattle was starting to grow then and turn into a real city. And that's one of the reasons I moved up into the Okanagons and to get away from Seattle itself. And today, I don't even recognize the city anymore. It's so completely creepy. And this so-called Chaz movement that's in the CD area, I grew up there in that area. I was a lower middle class kid that was a gifted child and earned my marks by, working at the Swept Wing Inn at night doing flaming shish kebab. I worked my way through college. Before I went to Pullman, I was at the UW, and at night I'd work out at the Swept Wing Inn. And Seattle was a very clean little town. And now it is taken over. I don't even understand it when the mayor says it's nonviolent. Okay, I can relate to that. And most all the thing was a bunch protesting, and in terms of nonviolent protesting. But this black movement doesn't make any sense, because I do understand that there's still great deals of prejudice in America. I live in one of those areas. Grants Pass is famous for its Ku Klux Klan, but it's not as pronounced here as it could have been, used to be in the 50s. I remember there was a gang that moved in from lower part of California, and they started doing graffiti down by the riverside. And by 6 blocks down, when the graffiti started, all of a sudden stopped because the house burnt down. And that was the Klan going in and taking out, an undesirable group of people that did not belong in Grants Pass. They do it as a vigilante type of situation. I don't approve of that. Welcome to Baracha, honey. The great Leslie and Dr. Fate and the Great Race, out there in the middle of nowhere. That's where Oregon is right now. And I know that a lot of people don't care for this mayor or governor we have down here, but I don't understand what's going up in Washington. I don't know. I can tell you that New York City, when they were doing their protests, all of a sudden trucks came in and deposited pallets of bricks for no reason. And had something to pick up and throw. Who did that? What was that for? Who's responsible for that? I will never probably know. But I can tell you that the distinction between Republicans and Democrats today is weirder than anything. I remember the look on my dad's face when he realized he was no longer a Republican. I thought he was going to kill himself or something. And yet, my sister runs the Democratic Party of Washington, and she won't talk to me about certain things because I'm neither a Republican nor a Democrat. I just have certain belief systems that I hold true. And I kind of remember a time when the Democrats and the Republicans both wanted the same thing for America. They just wanted to do it differently.